before I start, I'm just going to do a brief introduction to the presentation. I'm going to do an introduction to the afternoon session. My name is Louise Allen. I'm the Head of Innovation and Development Programmes with the Crafts Council of Ireland. And this afternoon I'm obviously presenting, and I'm presenting on a project called InnoCrafts, which is a European project that the Crafts Council have recently gotten involved in. I'm presenting briefly on that, but I'm also going to contextualise, hopefully, the presentations that are coming after me this afternoon. After me at 2:20 we have Teresa Berger, who's a jewellery designer and uses a lot of new technologies, including rapid prototyping in her process. Followed by that we have Sasha Sykes, who's director of Farm 21, and she's looking at heritage and materials. That's followed by Tara Carrigy, who's a designer and researcher and is looking at design innovation in technology and textiles. Then we'll have a panel session Q&A, and that will be chaired by Anne Mulrooney, who's the curator and manager of the National Craft Gallery. So I'm sorry that I couldn't be here with you this morning, and I hope that I don't repeat what was said this morning. I think it was a good sign that I was sitting up at lunch at 1 o'clock and nobody was there. It meant that it was obviously a very engaging morning if it ran over. So I mentioned I'm going to talk very briefly about InnoCrafts, which is the European project funded under the Interreg programme. But before that, I think that it's important to look at where we are right now at this point in history. And I think everybody is aware that we're at quite a critical point in how the world is being shaped right now. There are a multitude of critical factors that I suppose are converging at this point in time. And we're all aware that the pace of life has gotten very, very fast, and that the way that we consume, the way that we trade, the way that we purchase, the way that we manufacture, and the way that we experience things has fundamentally changed over the last decade. What we expect, even in terms of service and the immediacy of user experience, has changed. I know everyone has the experience of being very frustrated when a computer doesn't respond automatically, and I think that anyone who's a customer of Ulster Bank this week is probably very frustrated with the me too. The technology systems failure. So there is that tension between what technology is doing for us, but also the implications when something like huge technological systems fail. But also there's a significant shift, I think, in terms of societies, civilizations and communities in terms of what we value, in terms of how we engage, in terms of what we share, how we share, what we create, how we innovate. And it's becoming increasingly important how we do all these things and how we interactively do all of these things. And I think if we were to do a fast forward and look at what the world will look like in 20 or 30 years' time, and more importantly, what the world that craft inhabits will look like in 20 or 30 years' time, I don't think that we can probably even imagine or envision it. This is an image from the Trend Forecaster's Handbook, which is by Martin Raymond, who works in the Future Laboratory, or runs the Future Laboratory in the UK. And there's a number of things up there. It says 2021, and there's a desktop 3D printer. Now we already have an awful lot of those, or a proliferation of those coming on stream. But there are questions and huge implications for craft in terms of the way that we make, the opportunities that are presented by innovative and digital technologies, also potentially the risks, but also looking at the kind of materials, the kind of processes that we use, and increasingly how we use them as we're coming into a much more conscious society in terms of our resources and in terms of our energies. And if we look at what's happening right now, there are a lot of different phrases and terms that define, I suppose, the dawning of a new era or a new age. And I'm not sure if people are familiar with a guy called Jeremy Rifkin, and he's coined the phrase the Third Industrial Revolution. He calls himself the architect of the European economy, or the future European economy, and I'll be quoting from him in a little bit. But there is also terms about there being a collaborative age, and that's to do with the proliferation of communities of practice, both virtual and localised. And I suppose the need for us as a society to work together at many levels, both within and beyond organisations, and within teams and networks that span across industries and communities. And the need for us to be conscious that we are a unit that is working together. We're also looking at the innovation age, or there's a term, the innovation age, which is looking at transformational systems, or is cognizant of transformational systems and methods of production. And I'll talk in a few minutes about the impact of technologies like laser cutting and 3D printing and rapid prototyping. But there are a number of other factors that are happening right now, I suppose, that is bringing us to this critical point in time. And one of those is to do with energy. If you think about it, the entire industrial infrastructure that we have known pretty much all our lives, I think everybody in this room, is pretty much crumbling. It's falling apart. There's huge unemployment. We all know that it's tough times and that we are in a recession. And I suppose, to quote Jeremy Rifkin, he would say that the third industrial revolution will change the way that power is distributed in the 21st century. And the reason that this is possible now is because of the internet. It's because we have radically changed and globalized the way that we can communicate and that we can interact. But what's also changing in the coming era is that hundreds of millions of people will soon be producing their own energy. I'm sure if I asked how many people had gotten their walls filled or solar panels, or, there are all these grants. So we are becoming our own powerhouses, our own power units. And in the future, we're going to be able to generate and share green electricity on an energy internet, just in the same way that we're able to share information on the internet itself. And that shift in our energy sources to increasingly renewable sources, first of all, craft has a very valid place in that, in terms of the materials and the processes that we use. But combined with the seismic leaps in how we communicate, it's having a very profound impact. We're moving from a 200-year saga of commercialization, of capitalism, of industrious thinking, of entrepreneurial markets, of mass production, and of mass labour. And we're beginning a new era that's going to be marked by collaborative practice, social networks, and micro-manufacturing in localized areas. And one of the other huge contributing factors to this is the distributive age, and it's giving power back to the people to be able to trade, to be able to communicate, and to be able to do that locally. And I suppose there's a huge need within all of this for us to look at how we're shaping this world, and to look at how we can come up with new models, both business models and making models, that will be advantageous to this sector. I mentioned communities of practice as I suppose as one of the areas that everybody is aware has developed massively. We all know the impact of social networks at this stage. If you're not on a social network, you pretty much don't exist, particularly if you're in business. And we're familiar with things like Facebook and Twitter and Google. But I don't know if people, when I was researching to do this, I came across what I thought was great. It's a Weapons of Mass Creation Festival, and it takes place in Cleveland, Ohio, every year. And I suppose it's pointing to a new breed of community that is arising, and they coexist both in a virtual space around the globe, but they also exist in localized communities. And I suppose there's one fundamental factor in some of these communities that is bringing people together, and that is the wish and the desire to share experience and to make. And I think that's absolutely huge. At the Weapons of Mass Creation Festival, they have a plethora of offerings. So they combine making with design, with music, with workshops, with speakers and presentations, so that no matter what area you might be interested in, there is something there for everyone. But it's also pointing to that concept that there are no boundaries essentially anymore, that it is a process of collaboration and of inspiration among communities, and they are either local or globalized. Many of you hopefully have heard of the Maker Faire, mainly because it is coming to Dublin on the 14th of July, and it's an initiative of the Science Gallery. But Maker Faire was started by Make magazine in 2008, and it has become, again, a global phenomenon. It brings together massive amounts of people for a day, usually, sometimes over a weekend, and invites them to be creative and to actually make physical objects. Make magazine has a website. It initiated the Maker Faire. It has a book. It has a TV series. It has a maker shed, and it says that the Maker Faire is a community of makers who share their projects and skills. Make is what you make it. It's a growing DIY movement of people who look at things differently and who just might spark the next generation of scientists, engineers and makers. And I think it's very interesting that there is such an emphasis and a desire among communities and people that they actually want to create and make things with their hands again, physical objects. I think it's hugely encouraging for the craft sector, because it shows that people are placing value back into making and taking ownership for making into their own hands, and it's going to give them, as future consumers of craft, a deeper understanding of what is involved potentially in the process of making. There's another slide up there, or image up there, of TOG. I don't know if you've heard of hack spaces, but again, they're things that are becoming increasingly prevalent across the globe. The Science Gallery has its current exhibition and project is entitled Hack the City, and again it's asking people who live in environments and communities to engage and to reimagine, redesign and reinvent the spaces that they live in, the objects that they interact with on a daily basis, and this all has a potential impact on craft. This is a website called Thingiverse, and I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of open source design and sharing. Thingiverse is a website where people upload hundreds of thousands of designs for objects, well, thousands daily. There's hundreds of thousands of designs up there. And this image really struck me, because I'm sure people in the room looking at it might think that it looks quite familiar. It reminded me of Edmund de Waal, who was here last year giving his presentation at the World Crafts Council conference about, is it Netsuki? Yeah, I never pronounced the word right. But this is a beautiful tradition, a Japanese tradition of handcrafting objects. And what you see here is, I think it's called, someone said that it's a stone rabbit, it's a souvenir from Canada, and they replicated it in a number of iterations using 3D fabrication. And I suppose what we're now moving into is the transformational systems and technologies that are going to continue to have a massive impact on craft and on making. And the image here is from a piece of equipment called a laser saw. It's an open source design. It allows you to go online and to build your own laser cutter for a couple of $100 or euros. And the people who make this said it's about empowering people. It's about taking the power back from mass corporations into the hands of the individual. It isn't only engineers who are doing it, because this machine was actually made by an artist and a group of their friends. The artist's name is A.D. Wagenknecht, and she said that it was one of their goals was to list a supply of sources that were globally accessible. They provide a bill of materials, a parts list on the website, and the suppliers where you can get all of the parts. This machine, she said, is built for makers, for architects and tinkerers to get started making their own things. The unit cuts half-inch material with up to 100 microns of accuracy. So it's incredible to think that an artist with a group of friends can come together, can build this kind of technology and then make it available to the general public to... I think we should make one, absolutely. And a number of you, well, you're all, I'm sure, familiar with the 3D printer. The one, the MakerBot one is again available through open source design from MakerBot Industries. So you can essentially build this machine yourself for a couple of €100. The Objet laser printer is a little bit more high end. I think it costs about $20,000, sorry, I'm talking laser, it's a 3D printer. But that 3D printer can print using 14 different types of materials, all combined in the one 3D facility, and that includes materials like rubber, like plastics, like metal. So it really is coming on in leaps and bounds. Probably one of the more challenging or interesting ones to a degree is the one that's called the Cube there. And I think that's very, very recently released, but it's a desktop 3D printer. Off the shelf, it costs $1,200. And if you buy it, it comes with this pack, which gives you designs for 25 creations that you can make with your 3D printer. So it's like a starter pack to get you going. I mean, this is both very, very challenging and frightening, and also very, very, I suppose, opening up in terms of the potential of design. And I think both the challenge and the opportunity for craftspeople is to be able to take this technology, because you know your process and you know your material and you know your ability to design, and to completely invent and reinvent beyond the bounds of what anybody else who might be new to this can do. This is there's thousands or hundreds of websites that are out there. To name a few, this is one called Freedom of Creation. But there's also Maker Gear, there's MakerBot, there's Within Technologies. Actually, if you look at Within Technologies, it's very interesting. It has these beautifully formed objects, and they're all different medical devices. I actually thought they were jewellery when I looked at them first, but they're actually medical devices. There's Core Technologies, which is a company based in Dundalk, which has created a 3D printer that uses reams of A4 paper. There's a company called Objet, which makes the 3D printer I just showed you there. They're about to merger with a bigger company called Stratasys. And all of these offer pretty much unimaginable design and manufacturing capability. They also provide a very low entry cost, and they make it possible for virtually anybody to start designing and collaborating. Freedom of Creation is a Dutch company based in the Netherlands. They manufacture and produce a range of objects, lighting obviously being one, but they also do furniture, they do jewellery and accessories, and I think they do bags. And they say that since the world is becoming ever more digital, decentralised and connected, our approach on product development will change the world forever. MP3 changed the music industry forever. Digital cameras did the same for photography. Digital printing enabled everybody to become a publisher. Now the same transition is occurring for consumer products, and people will be able to create their own products with great ease and will not need to be bound by the selection they find in stores. As a result, the value for consumers will increase and waste will decrease. And then in terms of how we trade and the types of how we communicate, the types of distributive networks, the types of models and business models that we need, there, I suppose, again, are both challenges and opportunities. Finance is always a huge problem for, I think, actually everybody, almost every industry globally across the world at the moment, but particularly in the creative field. Historically, the creatives have never really received any significant levels of finance, and all of a sudden there's this huge focus and lens being put on the creative industries as though we're going to be the answer to the third industrial revolution, and in a sense we are. But what we need to do is we need to be lobbying for the kind of financial packages, whether it's microfinancing, whether it's creative credits. There's a number of initiatives that have launched in the Northwest region recently. If you haven't heard of them, they might be worth looking into if you live in the Northwest. But there's things like talent vouchers, where they're looking to pair creative people, craftspeople and designers with industries who might need to problem solve, and the talent vouchers are worth €5,000 each. The Western Development Commission have just launched a programme of microfinance. They have over $1 million to give away, to loan over the next 3-year period, and they're announcing today the first €250,000 that is going to become available. But for craftspeople as well, we in Ireland need to develop our infrastructure, so we need to be able to provide access to research and development, to localised manufacturing and production, to mobility, to design skills, to skills in terms of being able to access and use this new technology, and we need to be able to promote greater and deeper networks and potential for collaboration, both within craft disciplines and then outside of that cross-collaboratively. In terms of the shift in terms of e-commerce, you can go online now and you can essentially have an e-commerce shop within a matter of moments. Shopify is one tool that you can use to create a shop in a matter of minutes and get up and be selling online. And I'm sure you're all familiar with Etsy. And Etsy was founded by a number of guys, one in particular called Rob Callan, who made furniture in his apartment, and he was essentially frustrated by not being able to connect with potential buyers interested in what he had to offer. So he teamed up with a few friends, put a website together, and essentially cut out the middleman. So he put this face for craft objects as a craft market out there, and was able to connect directly with the buyers. Etsy is now in more than 50 countries. It has a turnover of 500 million, or had a turnover of 500 million last year. But it's not only a website, it's also an experience, and it's about bringing the craft producer together with the buyer and telling them a story and giving them a narrative. So Etsy hosts a number of seminars, they host workshops, they have virtual blogs and networking sites. And I suppose they are competing with global and mass corporations. And they are offering something that's quite different. And they're offering something that's a personalised and individualised user experience. And just, I suppose it's of interest, but the images here are from one of the founders of Etsy called Yared Tarbell, who's using, I think it's called an epilogue laser printer to manufacture these very intricate boxes and forms, and he is selling them, as far as I know, on Etsy himself. And then the very bottom picture, the one in green, is a picture of Rob Callan with one of the tables that he designed. But again, I think it's very interesting that craftspeople themselves are setting up these kind of sites, these kinds of ways of trading, and these kinds of ways of interacting, which is very, very positive for the craft industry. And I think Etsy is probably only one of hundreds of global internet companies that are bringing together producers and consumers in a virtual marketing environment. So in terms of InnoCrafts, as I said, it's funded through Interreg, and I suppose it has 15 partners, and which represent 12 different countries. And I can just quickly list the countries. It's if I can read them. It's Italy, France. Sorry, I can't read them. Sorry, but there's Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, Ireland, Finland. Anyway, I can give you the list afterwards. What's interesting about the InnoCrafts project, or at least what I find interesting about it, is about 3 of the organisations that are involved in this project are directly involved with craft workers and craft producers. The rest of them are involved with either chambers of commerce or enterprise boards. And I suppose, again, that's quite a shift when you think about it, that chambers of commerce in regions or in areas and enterprise boards are now looking at potentially what the craft sector can give back to the economy in terms of jobs, and also looking at how they can invest, because they actually don't know. They don't necessarily have the tools. And I suppose to say that InnoCrafts essentially is one of the disappointments for me when I went to the first meeting, which was in April, was that it does seem to be quite a theoretically led project. So it's about developing regional policies and exchange of experience that will support the infrastructure to develop craft enterprise. For me, I would like, and I believe that we will have, a much more practically led type of project in the future. But it's good for the Crafts Council to be engaging in these types of projects at this time, and to be able to access funding from Europe, and also to be able to interact at a commission level with the DG for Industry and Innovation, and talk directly and specifically to the commissioner. There is a commissioner who has a responsibility for craft in Europe. And I suppose just to close the themes that InnoCrafts are looking at, and if anyone wants to feed into any of these themes, if you have ideas or suggestions, I would welcome those, and I'd invite you to drop me an email. It's louise@ccoi.ie. We're looking at business models and business support services, which is fairly self-explanatory. Access to innovation, and that's access to innovation in terms of process and in terms of material. And I think it's quite interesting that Aalto University in Finland are the lead on that one, because I suppose Finland would have quite a reputation, both obviously in terms of their design and production, but also in terms of what they're doing with their educational system at the moment, which is a fusion of the economic school with the art and design school under the heading of Aalto University. The third theme is looking at internationalisation of small to medium craft enterprises and how we network and exchange information, and the Crafts Council of Ireland are leading on that theme. And then the final theme is the promotion of entrepreneurship among women and young people, and that's been led by Riga City Council in Latvia. So I suppose that's quite a whirlwind run through what is happening and a very, very brief look at what we're doing. The reason I suppose it's so brief is that the project has literally just kicked off in April, so I don't have a huge amount to report in terms of the development of it. But as I said, if anyone is interested in voicing their opinions on what kind of structures or supports you feel that you would need and would be beneficial right now, we'd be more than happy to hear from them. So thank you.